In today's video, we are going to go in a step-by-step relight this scene using physically based lighting and make it game ready by understanding the concept of EV100, luminance versus illuminance, contrast ratios, proper setup for directional lights with custom skybox materials, and then understand the tone mapper, color grading to finally get this scene with just global lighting actors. So physically based lighting, it's a workflow or approach in which you use real world values, making your scenes looks consistently better. So you are not guessing what are your lighting values are. Simply you are following these rules as a reference, and then you can break these rules as an artist. And in order to measure these values, we have two different terms, luminance and illuminance. Each one of them describes different type of lighting. Like for example, for luminance, if we are talking about luminance, this would be the amount of light that is projected or emitted from the light source itself. And usually for the measurement, it's measured using candela per meter square, which is candelas in Unreal Engine, and it's usually the default values for your lighting unit. But on the other side, illuminance will describe then the amount of light that is falling onto a specific surface. So it's usually not the same amount of luminance, because when you have a very bright light source, it doesn't mean that it will spread or emit all these light photons on the same surface area. Like for example, for point lights, they spread the light or emit the light everywhere around it. It's not specified for a specific angle. So it's kind of different from the luminance. And the illuminance is measured by lux. And lux means lumens per meter square, which is usually defined in Unreal for directional lights. And why we are using lux for directional lights instead of candelas or lumens? For example, if we have a directional light, and looking here at this data table, it's very simple. But you have here, like for example, in noon, the intensity of the directional light will be around 100,000 lux, and it could be even more. And that means the light that is emitted or falling into a surface area is almost around this number. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the directional light or the sun disk itself has the same amount of lighting. So it will be definitely much, much brighter, which could not be added usually in Unreal Engine because it would be very big number. So looking here at this image, it's describing what's actually going on. So for luminance, it's from the light bulb itself. But for illuminance, it's this area, like a surface area. And because of the nature of light, lighting will not keep the same energy across multiple distances. It will lose energy. So it's not usually the same brightness as it's coming from the light source itself. So we need to understand the differences here between these two different terminologies, because each one of them has different values, and we will use it later while working with exposure and metrics to calculate how much lighting or luminance versus illuminance in our scene to know if our scene is looking good as a base or not. So let's get started here in this scene. This is a free sample provided by Epic Games, so you can use it on your own or use any other scene as you want. First of all, we need to remove any lighting data. It's better to start with a blank scene, and here I mean that it's not having any lights, except if you are going to improve the existing light. But for this example, I'm going to remove any light actor, all of them, from here, and to ensure we can search for any light, here, scene setup, let's remove all of that. And let's scroll down to ensure we don't have any other existing lights. And also let's ensure that we don't have sky or post-process volumes or any reflection capture actors. So here, let's see if there is any post-process volume. And for reflection, we have another reflection actor. So it should be all good now. And for an extra step of ensuring that our lighting is working well, we can go to Window and then World Settings to ensure that we don't have any light maps here. And if you have, you can go here and force no pre-computed lighting, and then go to Build and hit Build Lighting Only. This will remove all your baked lighting data in your scene. So now we have a clean slate or a clean scene to start from. So first of all, I'll create a new folder and let's call it global lighting. And there's a quick trick about it. You can double click on it or go here, select make current folder, and it will automatically highlight it in this green color. And that will make it easier to add any new actors. So for example, if I go here to lights and add directional light, it will be added directly to this folder. So you don't need to search for your outliner, especially if you have a lot of actors like this, and then move it to the lighting folder, do all of this hustle. You can quickly assign it to this current folder by doing this trick. And now we need to hide our directional light because we will add our sky dome, which is the primary object that will add our mood and attention for the player. So in order to create a sky that is more closely going to be like a golden hour or so, I'm using here a pack called Skies LA from Fab. And let's scroll down. I'll use this sky sphere. Usually for sky spheres, it's inverted normal mesh because you see the sky from inside, not from the outside. So instead of creating your material as a two-sided material, you can simply use an inverse sky sphere. So we are adding it here. Now we can see it in unlit view. Let's reset the position or the location. And for the scale, I'm going to set it to 15,000. You can go bigger if you want. But the thing is, the skylight threshold is going to be very large, and making the sky sphere bigger than the threshold, it will make the skylight works better without any black reflections spotted. So your skylight will perform much better. And here for the material, let's choose a material like maybe like this one and assign it here. And now we can see our material. For sure, it's not completely like golden hour, but it's basically our base sky. We can adjust it later, or you can use any other sky. But for the values, this page is called orders of magnitude illuminance. And these are for referencing the values. So for a skylight or a sky sphere, it's basically luminance. And in the luminance table, we are going to see something that is very close to sunset or sunrise. So here there is typical photographic scene at sunrise or sunset. It's usually around 25 candela per meter square. So if we go here in our material instance, we have source brightness. We don't need to set it to 25. It's not accurate. So how can we exactly measure the value for the sky? We should go here, go to visualize, and then HDRI adaptation. And as we can see, there are a lot of numbers in here, and it's really frustrating to know what is actually happening in here. So we need to focus on luminance meter. There's a luminance meter and illuminance meter. Here in luminance meter, it says net, and net is candela per meter square. It's usually the same values. We don't need to convert these values. So we need to keep it around 25. But if we try to go like in a lot of areas, it's not the same number. The number is changing. So let's take an average. For example, this area, this is around 14 net. So if we get back here to our sky, we can set it to 50. So it's almost 25. It's slightly higher than 25. But this is like an average, so we can keep it as it is for now. And for the rest of the scene, it's still totally black. And that's because we are not using skylight. So let's add a skylight to our scene, just like this. And we should set it to movable. We are going to change the sky material a lot. We need to make it capture really quickly. And for real-time capture, it's usually cheaper than recapturing, especially for games. So we can keep it for now and then turn it off later. For cube map resolution, I prefer to increase it a little bit. You can stay in between like 256. So for the skylight, it's just basic values. We just enabled real-time capture, increased the cube map resolution, and set it to movable just to get the distance field ambient occlusion, which will make the skylight or ambient lighting looks better. But for now, our scene still looks very bright and flat. And that's because our exposure, which is our next step. Exposure could be a bit tricky for a lot of people, and you might not know which is the proper value for exposure compensation for your minimum and maximum EV100, and what does actually EV100 means. So basically exposure is like equation. You are using different or multiple factors that are added in a specific equation, and then you can get your brightness. It's calculated then with this measure. So for manual exposure, you can find f-stop or aperture, you can find the shutter speed, the ISO, etc. But for auto exposure, it's not using all of these values. So to go over it, let's add a post-process volume. Go down here, enable infinite extent unbound. So our post-process volume is covering the entire space. We don't need to rescale it to a very big volume. Then get back to exposure. Here to start, it's better to set the exposure compensation to 0. And if we try to go inside, actually, it will start to be brighter inside. That's the auto exposure adaptation or eye adaptation, which is currently happening now in this histogram. As you can see now, exposure is trying to go lower in these values, so it's usually brighter. And if you get out, it's going to higher values, so it's less brightness in outside. So in order to control that, we can do different things. A lot of people, what they actually do is set the minimum and maximum to 1, which is very bright for now, because it's physically based lighting. Usually these values should be higher than 1. It's probably around 5 to 7, depending on your mode or your brightness level that you need and other art directions. So it's not a static number that you can always go for. It's usually flexible based on your scene or on your game. So let's start, for example, by 5 for minimum and maximum, still a bit bright. So you can start with or go for 7. Now exposure is stuck to 7. As you can see now, this blue one is what actually the auto exposure is trying to go to, but you are restricting it by setting the minimum and maximum. If you uncheck this, it will start to go for it. But now for the minimum and maximum, it's set to, like, both of them are static or the same number. A lot of people do that. You then don't have a lot of flexibility of your lighting. Even if it seems a bit dark, it's fine. You can adjust it for exterior, but if you go interior, you see nothing, which is not proper or not good for a lot of scenarios, especially for games. So what we will be actually doing is to set up our exposure values based on our EV100 here. So we can have dynamic brightness as we are going into different places. So we can use this one, exposure compensation curve. And actually to do it, right click and go for miscellaneous. And here is curve. Choose a curve float, select, and let's call it ECC, exposure compensation curve, underscore main global lighting. Let's open it. And you might think it's quite frustrating, but actually not. It's very simple. Let's assign it first here. And we have 2 axes. This one, the horizontal axis and the vertical axis. And basically, the horizontal axis is controlling the EV100 as we go here in this histogram. And vertical axis is controlling the exposure compensation value. So for example, now we are at 7. We can press on the middle mouse button here. We have 2 brackets. This one is the horizontal and this one is vertical. This is for exposure value and this is for exposure compensation. So let's set it to 7. And now pay attention to what will happen. As we can see here, exposure compensation is set to 0. This is from the settings, which means post-process settings. And the exposure compensation from the curve is set to 0 as well. So if we try to make it higher, we'll bit up like this, keep it 7 and keep it 1. Let's keep it 5, for example. So now exposure compensation from the curve is set to 5. So it's overriding the value that is in here. If we try to undo it, we will not use the curve. So how we actually use this one for interiors and exteriors and complex environments. So for now, let's keep this one as it is, like this. We might need it to be a bit brighter. So let's keep it at 2. But when we go inside, the exposure average scene or exposure value will be very, very low. So the average scene EV100 now is around minus 5.5. So let's add another point here. Let's press on the middle mouse button. This is minus 5.5. And we need to raise up the exposure compensation so it's much brighter. So we can go higher, like 10, for example. So for now, we can see it's now much brighter indoor. And when we go outside, it's for sure it's still bright because we still don't have proper or final values. But when we go inside, it's brighter. As you can notice here, the exposure compensation curve. When we go outside, yeah, it's still bright, but you can then lower it like this. So let's see the differences now. Inside, outside. Yeah, it's very, very strict and transitioning very quick way. So we can now uncheck these and go here. Let's set the maximum to 7. So it's not going up than 7. And here, let's set the maximum minus 5.5. But if we go here again, there is the average scene value is still around 3.5 almost. So we can get this one, set it to 3.5. And now we go inside. Yeah, it's still very quick transition. We can set these to the same value like this. And now let's reduce this one. Let's give it 1, for example. So when we go outside, it's very smooth now. So here's inside. So you can see it transitions very quickly. Here's outside, it gets back. So it's very, very smooth transition. So let's adjust it now like this. Get back to the curve here. Very quickly make it very dim like this. Because we only have skylight here. So it's usual to have it low in brightness like that. And for interiors, when we go inside, this is still very, very bright. We can go lower. So let's have it like this, maybe 0 or maybe -1. So it's very low in intensity like that. Even lower, -2 and 2. And for the outside, let's keep it even dimmer, just like that. This is very basic curve. It's not very advanced one, and you can add even more. So it's based on average scene EV100, and then you can adjust the exposure compensation. And let's then adjust our contrast ratio. And what actually that mean is the difference between EV100 values in light versus in shadows. And this could be a very good metric or a base ratio to start with to light your scenes in an easier way. And for golden hour, sunrise or sunset, usually the contrast ratio is not too big, around 2:1 in difference. If we are looking at light side, if the EV100 is 2, then on the shadow side should be around 0, could be around 0.5. We can measure it by using cube, let's go up, and assign a gray material. Basically, this is 18% white, and this is the proper value for middle gray. It's not 0.5 because exposure is not linear, it's logarithmic. So it's not working as the half between 0 and 1 is 0.5. No, it's not like that. It's not linear. You can look for other references for it, but basically it's not taking an average between the 0 and 100. It's taking the geometric mean, which is the square root of the average values. So let's get back now to the HDRI adaptation. As we can see now, it's almost the same because we only have skylight. So we can start adding our directional light. And for directional light, usually for low sun, it's usually a bit lower than that. So let's start with 5,000. And lux, let's add 5,000. Ensure at first it's set to movable. It's too bright for sure. So let's try 500. Now in the light side, it's around 7.1. And here it's 4.4. So it's almost 2.5 stops difference. So we can make it even lower. Let's try 300 and maybe 200. This is around 6 in EV100 and this is around 4. So now it's working better. For sure, the direction of the sunlight is not correct because this is not a sunset scene or a golden hour scene. Let's add it like this and use the Control L shortcut to position our sun in a proper way. Let's try to have it like this. Basically, most of the environment will be in shadow, which is totally fine. And now for the color, if you want a specific color, basically it's around 2000 maybe temperature, but if we started with it as a base, it will be too red, too orangey color. Let's try to keep it as 3000, or if you don't want to use temperature, you can use the color to have a specific color, but be careful with it because it might not be very accurate as temperature, especially for natural lights. Then for source angle, let's try a higher number like 5, so it's softer in shadows. Usually we don't go like 25 or 15. It might be good for some situations for cinematics maybe. So let's try 4 or 5 as a start. But for now, I still see shadowed area is still too dark. So it comes then to tone mapping. And we don't see that very harsh contrast between light and shadow. And for player visibility, to ensure better player experience as well, it's better to have more bright shadows. Usually in games, you will see shadows are brighter. And you don't need to add a lot of fill lights. Like, you can go here and add a point light like this, increase the intensity, be even higher, make it higher like that. To add a lot of fill lights. This is not a proper workflow. We are trying here to make everything with just global lights. For tone mapping, it's in post-process volume. Can go down in local exposure. There is shadow contrast and highlight contrast. Let's start with shadow contrast. Usually this value Epic Games doesn't recommend to go lower than 0.6. So start with 0.6 as a base. See, this is quite drastically big difference between before and after. For sure, it still looks a bit flat in a lot of areas. But if you are looking at it like that, our sunlight is not very harsh, usually just like the golden hour, and the shadows are not too dark. Let's start with 0.6 like that. And for highlight, this is if you are having very harsh highlights in your sky, probably, or in your directional light, just like that. So let's keep the highlight contrast as it is for now. And also, we can go down in film, which stands for filmic tone mapping. In 2, we can adjust the lower side of the slope, which is controlling the shadows or dark areas. So if it's lower, pay attention to the curve now. It's making the shadows brighter, but you will lose a lot of data from the coloring. As you can see now, yeah, it gives you more data to see, but actually it loses the color data. So we have to be very careful with this one. I just reduced it by 0.1. And for the slope, it controls the curve steepness. So if it's higher, it would be more contrast. If it's lower, it's lower contrast. So let's keep it as default for now. And for shoulder, it controls the highlights. As you can see now, the curve is going even higher. So our highlights will be more saturated than before. So this is basically in tone mapping to adjust your shadowed areas, make it better, and it's not very, very dark, just like before. And in my opinion, we can keep it like this for now and then get back to it later with color grading and making it much better. But let's then go to the next step, which is using the fog actors. Let's first start with the exponential height fog. And to add it here, it might not work as before because we are using physically based values here as a start. So even if you try to make it white like this, you might not notice it, except if you are going to make it brighter, like 100, for example. I want to make it a bit thick fog. So let's make it like 200, or actually let's keep the 100 and increase the fog density to 0.04. Let's give it a little bit of color. Actually, if we try to make it very orangey, like this, could work. Or if we can go to the other side of making it very bluish, maybe let's try 220 in hue and around 0.6 in saturation. This could work, but if you want to try the other side of it to make it more like this, for example, this could be good as well in a lot of cases. So I prefer to start with a bit of bluish light, like the sky. And then we need to enable for sure the volumetric fog, because exponential height fog only on its own, it's making it very flat, and in interiors you will see very bad lighting for sure. So let's keep it like that with volumetric fog, and then we can like increase extinction scale if you want, change the color, the view distance, and albedo value. It's better to keep the albedo value of it as it is. And same goes for the scattering distribution. Usually for this kind of time of days, the scattering distribution is usually higher, like that. Let's try 0.8, just like this. And we also need to add a sun disk to our material. Let's save all of that. And let's basically add this material. So here's quickly the sun disk material that you can use and add to your shader. So if we get back and open our material instance, we can now see the sun disk. There is some brightness. Let's make it very high like this. This is not very high. As you can see now, our sun disk is added to our material. And the radius of it, let's make it smaller, maybe even smaller. We like that. And brightness should be higher. And for the color, I want to make it very orangey or a bit reddish, like that. Same goes for the sun glow. So I will copy it and paste it here. And for the softness of it, as you can see, you can control softness. Let's keep it as it is. You can control the radius of the glow. So now we have our sun disk. You can quickly add it to your material like that. So for exponential height fog, if we scroll down, you can see now scattering distribution is looking much, much better, because we can actually see a sun disk added in here as the sky. If you try to rotate this one, the directional light will stay the same because it's separate from the sky sphere. So you can control it like that, and it will be added to your directional light. So for now, let's get back to directional light here. I need to increase the intensity actually. This is too high. Let's try 1000. And let's reduce the fog a little bit. Let's try 0.03. So it's very, very thick right now. And in our material, this is too bright. So I can reduce it. This number could be good. Let's close this material. Yeah, save all changes. And in our post-process volume, I need then to start color grading. Let's go down here. We can adjust temperature to make it colder or warmer as you want. You can adjust the tint. I usually prefer to start with shadows, midtones, highlights, and then get back to global settings. So to start with shadows, I prefer to reduce the saturation of it. Let's try 0.7, so it's not very saturated in colors. And then we can control the gamma, so we can add a color for it. Let's try, for example, something a little bit bluish like that. It's very subtle, but it's adding a lot to the scene. For midtones, let's try to increase the contrast, 1.05, just like that. And for the gain, we can increase the gain just by 10%. For highlights, you can control your highlights from here. You can add more contrast. This will be visible in these surfaces, as you can see. You can keep it as it is for one. Same goes for gain and contrast. And then let's get back to global control. Let's reduce the saturation a little bit. And for contrast, we can try different things. But actually, I prefer to keep it as default and maybe increase the amount of contrast just slightly, like this, by 7%. But now this is very global setup and it doesn't work for interiors. So let's get back to exposure. We can use the exposure compensation curve, get back to it, enable the HDRI adaptation, disable these two. So now it's around 4.2. Let's say 4 should be brighter. -2 could be good, but -2.5. So we are not losing highlights. And here this is around 7. So let's add another point for 7. This could be brighter. So we are not losing a lot of contrast in here. So basically 7 is around 0. And now we need to adjust the shadowed area. This is around 3. Or let's remove this one for now. And let's go for interior. Here, this is around -4.8. Let's keep this one around -3. Just like that. And you can control the curve from here. Let's keep it as it is. This one, let's make it a bit brighter so it's brighter outside, just like that. So even if we are in shadows, we can still see the lighting in a good way, just like that. So now our shadows look good. In interior, it looks good as well. We don't need to add a lot of post-process volumes. And remember, this is a base lighting, a global lighting. And here even in very bright area like this, it's looking very good. So now our curve, if we get back to our curve, the range for us is between let's say -5 and 7. So we can get back to our post-process volume and set the range to be between -5 and 7. So it matches the exposure compensation curve now. So now this is very global light setup, and we can make it even better by adjusting other values. Like here for directional light, use the light shaft occlusion, so it's working better. Let's try to keep it around 0.5. And let's even add a Gobo light for our directional light. I'm using this material. This is basically a light function material to add a fake shadow. So our shadows doesn't look very, very flat. So let's try to make it like this. So we are clothing this one and we are just keeping light in specific areas. And it's looking even softer. We can even adjust the location of our sun so it corresponds to the material. And if we get back even in here, let's try 2000. This might seem a bit too bright in a lot of situations, but this looks very good actually. But if we wanted to use 2000 and our lighting looks very bright, we can reduce the highlight contrast in our local exposure settings. But let's keep it as it is for now. And then go in our skylight. We can increase it a little bit. Now we can break the rules of the PBL because we are artists and we need to create good looking scenes. So let's try to make this one a bit bluish, just 20% saturation. And maybe let's make the intensity 2 instead of 1. Can you still see it's looking, might be a bit dark in some cases, but later you can adjust the post-process volume. As you can see, this looks very, very cinematic. This very soft light that's coming from directional light, and it's going or added on objects like that. Can make it even, try to make it even higher. Can try 1500. Let's give it 1000. And if it's softer in angle, it will not be very good actually. So let's keep it 5 as it is. For volumetric scattering intensity, we want more fog, but I don't recommend it actually. It's too much fog like that. So now in post-process volume, we can do final touches to make our scene looks even better and more playable. For final lumen settings, which we explained before in details for our community, feel free to check the link down below if you want to join us. We discussed in depth the different ray lighting modes and how actually Lumen works. It was under the hood experiment to know more about Lumen and fix all the flickering issues and everything that might looks very bad or very weird to control with Lumen. So first of all, for game lighting, it's better to keep it for surface cache, but if you want much better results, for sure, you can use head lighting. But let's keep it surface cache. And as you can see also at the background foliage is much better with head lighting. Keep it at surface cache. Every other option, keep it to default. And here you can see diffuse color boost. If we wanted to check that, we can go to Lumen scene, and let's try to set it to 4. It's much, much brighter now. And actually what it does is it makes the base color maps brighter, so it contributes more to the indirect lighting. This is a quick fix if you don't need to fix your materials, but it's not really recommended to go very high with these values. So if it's 4, you can see it's more bounces light in there and more indirect lighting. It's recommended to go within 1 to 2. Let's stick to 1.8, for example. And for skylight leaking, this could be good for some interiors to have more indirect lighting here or skylighting. So as you can see before and after, let's try 0.1. As you can see before and after, this could be good for some interiors, but it's not recommended in all scenarios because it adds more light leaking. So you can use it, but with cautious. If you want to make your interiors brighter, and you don't need to add a lot of light actors in there. So this option is really helpful to do that, and you can control the tint or the color of it and the distance of the leaking. Same goes for reflections. We keep it as default. We don't do a lot of changes in here. For film grain, I like to add film grain. Let's make it 1 and maybe reduce it in midtones, 0.5, 0.2, highlights, maybe a bit lower in shadow, 0.8 or 0.7. So it's not very noticeable, but it's there. You can control the size of it as well from this one if you want more grainy style, but let's keep it as default. It's basically about it in post-process. There are a lot of options in here, which we can explain later in further videos. And for sure, we do explain all of that in our community and our workshops and sessions. So that's basically it for these other features. Let's get back here and increase the detail strength to 1.2. And for the bloom, let's try convolution bloom. So that's for a physically based lighting. As you notice, it's based on these values. So you can adjust it as an artist, or you can break these rules as an artist. You don't need to be very strict with these rules and numbers. Feel free to be creative with it. Also, feel free to add other lights. But for now, for this one, as you can see, we used just 5 actors. We didn't use a lot of actors, and even our interiors looks kind of good as a base. For sure, we can add another post-process volume for this one, make it not very bright like this, and we can color grading to be better or different from exterior if needed. But this is as a base. We don't need to add a lot of light actors, just 5 actors, and it looks good. But it's the proper way of using 5 actors. So that's why it's called global lighting. This could be as a base for your game, for your scene, and then you can add later on other light actors for more polishing levels. So that's it for our today's video. I hope you liked it. And if you want to learn more about lighting and other topics that you might be struggling with, feel free to join our community and ask for your customized learning path so we can craft it for you. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.